binding this wall hanging, and I'm gonna show you my 3 favorite hacks that you just might not know about. This pattern is by Elizabeth Hartman. It is called Legendary. Stick to the end of the video and I'll show you the other one that I made. So just a little sidebar, in Canada, this is called a Sasquatch, but there is another indigenous legendary humanoid type creature called a Wendigo, which is way scarier. So that's why I decided to add this applique skull to my quilt. But I think the original inspiration for this quilt pattern is probably the American Bigfoot. Does Australia or any other country have sort of a Wendigo style legend? Maybe South America or South Africa or somewhere? Let me know in the comments. All right, let's get to binding. I always cut my binding strips to 2.5 inches just to keep everything really simple. And I also hand bind my quilts because I think it looks the best and I enjoy slowing down with some handwork every once in a while. Now, I'm gonna take the piece of fabric that I'm gonna use to bind my quilt and I'm going to hold it up to my quilt and figure out how many strips of this I'm gonna need. This is very accurate. So that's how I determine if I'm going to have enough fabric. If I don't have enough fabric, then I find another piece of fabric. This is not a hack, that's just how I do it. Now I realize that cutting your binding this way is not on the bias and all that kerfuffle, but it is cost effective and fast. I sew my strips together at a 45-degree angle and I press those seams open. Making sense so far? Okay, now here is the first real hack. I take all of my attached binding and I tape it to this little piece of PVC pipe. This is a 5-inch piece of pipe with a cord running through it. I then roll that binding up onto that pipe. You don't need to have a piece of PVC pipe. This is easy enough to make with a paper roll of some sort and a piece of yarn or string. I will put the exact measurements of mine in the description below. Now I know I haven't folded my fabric and pressed it. Don't freak out, I'm gonna get there. Now I hang this around my neck and I am ready to roll. Get it? Roll. Let's go stitch. I'm gonna start sewing just like I normally would, and I'm going to leave a tail at the beginning here to attach to the other end of the binding when I come around. Now, even though my binding hasn't been folded and pressed, it does still fold nicely and I can stitch a 1/4 inch away from the edge of my quilt, just like you would if you were doing traditional binding. Here comes hack number 2. Now, as I approach the corner of my quilt, I am going to stop, put a 1/4 inch away as you normally would, and I'm gonna put my needle down. I'm not stitching off the end, I'm not pulling my needle up and clipping any threads, I'm putting my needle down. And I'm going to turn that entire quilt with my needle down, and I am going to pick that needle back up again, readjust, drop my presser foot, and keep on sewing. Now this does seem like a really minor hack, but I didn't break thread or do anything silly here. This is just keeping it simple. This works really awesome when you have one of those really big unwieldy quilts. I used to lose all the corners all the time. This is simple but effective. Do you do this when you bind? Because if you don't, this is gonna be a game changer for you. And if you do, share it with somebody. Not everybody does this. And that really surprised me when I started talking about this. I finish my binding the normal way you would by measuring, cutting, and attaching the 2 ends at an angle. Now, I do use these larger clips to kind of clip the quilt out of the way. You can also do this with pins or maybe even a small child. Now my binding is attached and I'm ready to sit down and binge watch Netflix guilt-free. And this is where we get to hack number 3. Do you remember how I didn't spend a ton of time burning my fingers ironing my binding in half? Yeah, that's because you don't have to. Not when you hand bind your quilts. as I fold my binding over the edge of my quilt, the fabric is going to naturally and seamlessly fall into place where it needs to be in order to hand stitch. So I'm just gonna hand stitch this down and call it a day. I think you could use this technique for machine binding as well. I haven't given it a try doing that, but let me know if you do. It was my friend Gail, who's made more quilts than even she can count, who gave me some of these tips. And now I hate binding less. A little bit less. Like a smidge less. I still kind of dislike binding. Here's the other wall hanging that I made using this legendary pattern by Elizabeth Hartman. It's a little more traditionally Canadian. Unfortunately, not sponsored. If you're new to this channel and you want to check out some long arm quilting videos, make sure to check out the other playlists. And also, if you want to meet me in person, maybe you want to join me on a cruise that I'm going on with Smtih and Bethanne Nemesh in January 2025. It's like 6 weeks away or something like that, but there's still a couple spots available, I think. So I'm going to link that below too. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.